should push the camera more to John so they're both centered. Yeah, John's.
Well, good evening. It's Wednesday night. It's approximately, oh, it's right. This is our special episode. My brain has got that needle right on habit. This is our special guest. Tonight we'll get right back to Mr. Sherlock on All About Atlantic Park. And so tonight it's Tuesday. Hope all of you saw the producer, Robert K. Dean. This show is sponsored by the Tidewater Liberty Partners and the Virginia Beach Tea Party. And I'm the host for their show, John Moss. And our producer, as I mentioned, is Robert K. Dean. And we're in his home studio with the great American flag in our background. And tonight we have the author of the Atlantic, I'll call it Atlantic Park Research Project. You know, really, this is, to me, a Pulitzer Prize piece of work. And it's disappointing, really, that the, I guess you could say, our local media elite have yet to even pick up on the Bacon Rebellion, which is where it currently is published. But, you know, often they pick up and take a story. So hopefully, before it's all over, Jim, they're going to see that this is probably, matter of fact, it's, since the, I forget what that project was called that Robert will remember, that the writer for the pilot, before he moved on and went back up north, did that big project on stuff that was going on. John Holland, yes, that great work. But this is, goes into, there's no atom unexposed by Mr. Sherlock in dissecting the conception and the birth and the evolution of the Atlantic Park project. So tonight, without further ado, tonight we were going to talk about risk, but as always, Jim's going to really set that up, set the context, and we're going to get right into talking about the risk aspect of Atlantic Park. So Jim, over to you.
Good evening. I'll start this off by saying that this is a public-private development, and the concept of public-private developments is about, in a perfect world, is about government management of risk by turning the risk over to a private developer whose business it is to manage risk, who is good at it. And that's in a perfect world. In a perfect world, for example, the city would provide city land and maybe some streetscapes and that sort of thing, but the foundation and the developer would build and own everything else. I mean, that's the idea. And as far as managing risk, when a developer comes up with a proposal, he's measuring risk in order to propose the price that he's going to pay and what he's going to build and what it's going to cost him and what his upside is. That's what they do before they ever get in touch with the government. Okay, that's what they do all day, every day. And the ones that are good at it make a lot of money, and the ones that aren't good at it go out of business. And that's why capitalism works. It rewards risk takers who can manage it. The government is not good at that, and no government really is. They're not. It's not how they're organized, equipped, and trained, as we would say in the military. In Atlantic Park, done properly, all the way back in 2017, the city knew that it wanted a entertainment venue, a concert hall, and the parking for the concert hall. That's what they knew. That was the city requirement. They had on the table 3 or 4 unsolicited proposals to build on the old dome site land. And they said, and in a perfectly reasonable manner, they said, all right, how about we we'll send out a request for qualifications, so who can build whatever it is you guys want to build and include in that the concert hall. And obviously you would put the parking in it because but in a perfect world, they would have built and owned the concert hall. We would have provided the land, and they would have owned the entire infrastructure. They'd owned everything there. They had a terrific team, the developers did. They'd have managed that, but the city didn't go that way. And we wind up, we the citizens, with a tremendous amount of economic risk for things that we really never signed up for in the beginning. We still only own the concert hall and the parking, yet we owe $323 million in principal and interest and equity on that. That happened over 7 years, but that's what happened. So anyway, we're going to talk about risks tonight. But my point to you is that we should never have had to have this discussion. If it had been developed the way it should have been developed, the city would have provided the land and the developer would have built everything else. That's not how it worked out. So we're going to talk about the risk to the project as it is. And they're considerable. They are more than considerable because they made such they bungled the surf park part of it to the point that the surf park is a great economic risk as a standalone, and it's the feature of it is the singular feature of Atlantic Park. So when we talk about risk, I will tell you that the city council doesn't in public session. They don't. I looked at 7 years worth of council sessions, and the guy beside me is the only guy that brought up risk, and he brought up in public session, and because in 2020, I think, or 2021, he in public session brought up the rampant inflation and how that was going to drive up costs, and that maybe the city ought to pause and see whether their initial assumptions were still true. That fell flat. There wasn't any conversation, at least in the public session, about that. So we the people and the press, who is to report for us about what's going on, never were provided an open discussion of the risks of Atlantic Park. We weren't. I will tell you folks something that you may remember or not, but the way you find out about risk is when a city or a developer or anybody uses bonds, revenue bonds, to raise money. The Securities and Exchange Commission requires them to discuss all known risks in that document. So I got, when you read my Part 5 economic risks here in Bacon's Rebellion, I broke that down into 3 or 4 they didn't talk about and like 18 that they listed. But the only place that ever appeared was buried in the state bond issue for the surf park. And they talked about risk to the whole project. So that's background. So that's really what you want to know about your elected representatives. Is the city council and are their appointees on the Virginia Beach Development Authority, are they openly discussing risk reward? They'll talk to you all day about rewards, about increased tax flows and all that. If this is built, they won't talk to you about the risk, and that shouldn't be. So anyway, that's my platform. In the I'll go through them the way that I listed them in my article. I consider, and if any resort area businessman would consider, that the fact that they need 1,600 full-time equivalents to run that place is a big risk. The oceanfront businesses have a terrible time staffing. They've all been shorthanded. And all of a sudden we're supposed to find 1,600 more qualified people to operate.
That's a lot of cultural visas.
Right. Well, I'm sure a lot of that. It's all levels, but it's a lot of skilled people. There are some unskilled jobs, I'm sure, in the apartments, but most of it is skilled work. And we have a very low. I think it's 2.1% when I looked it up. Unemployment rate in Virginia Beach,
Very low.
very low. And like I said, there's no doubt that the resort area is already short of people to do the job. So I consider that a big risk.
To put that in perspective, the social services department with the city is just under 1,600 positions. So that gives you the scope of what that really represents.
Anyway. That's why I listed it first. Utilities is interesting. Uh, I don't have the figure on the electricity draw of Atlantic Park, but it's got to be gargantuan. It's got to be a very large figure to run all of those apartments, the wave park, all the restaurants, offices, yada yada. It does, and that's a new draw for Virginia Beach. Dominion Power has to bring that power in, and the price of electricity not only has gone up, it's guaranteed to continue to go up. So first, it's a price risk. Then, depending on they talk about regulatory risk. Mm-hmm. Depending on the rules on what you can use to generate electricity in the future, and restrictions on how much you use per business and all that, that could be a problem. Natural gas, they do have natural gas coming out there. We're supposed to get increased supply. That's being worked on. The Mountain Pipeline
Correct.
has a spur that's to bring more natural gas to Hampton Roads, and that's a good thing because they've been rationing the Navy for years.
Yes.
In the wintertime. But utilities, cost and availability of electricity is an issue. Security, I don't know why they didn't mention security in the listed. They have a very long list of things they list in the bond issue, but security's going to be a big deal. I put the map in there that shows that Atlantic Park's being built dead square in the middle of the worst crime corridor in Virginia Beach. And the police know, I guarantee you, Second Precinct, I guarantee you knows that that's going to attract a lot of bad people, just like Town Center did. Wound up had to put a police substation in Town Center because of the gang activity there. And we have a relatively small gang problem in Virginia Beach, but Norfolk, relative to the rest of the nation, is off the charts. And they're going to have to deal with crime in a way that we, the citizens, haven't been told what the plan is.
What will be interesting is whether or not the security within the perimeter of this is a charge through the CDA to the properties within the CDA, or whether they try to pass that bill back to the unrestricted general fund and do that with police on duty versus police off duty being paid by the CDA. That'll be interesting to see how that unfolds.
I don't know how that's going to work, but our primary as citizens is to make sure that the place is welcoming and secure, which is a tough nut to crack, frankly. And I would just like to know how the developers and the Virginia Beach Police plan on handling that. If there is a plan, that's not been revealed. The next one is noise. That also wasn't on the list. It's going to be a huge problem. As soon as they decided to open the wall of the concert hall and broadcast and have 1,500 people sit outside for the concerts,
drinking,
I don't know how they're going to deal with it because the city, and I can't find it right now, but in one of the documents I read that they've preemptively given the concert hall a noise ordinance variance.
It's in the lease.
Okay, it's in the lease.
Lease with Live Nation.
Right. So I just don't. They first off, they're having there are 309 apartments in the development, and then the people immediately outside. All the I know that what's the name of that district down there?
Old Beach.
Shadow Lawn.
Well, Shadow Lawn's to the right, but Old Beach is really close.
Old Beach and Shadow Lawn, and them they're aware and they're not sure how that's going to work. Even when there's not concerts, the outdoor drinking and shouting and clapping and all the things that'll happen, hopefully in a full surf park. Well,
Yes, we do need it to be successful now that the mistake has been made.
right. Exactly. Why don't I stop? That you reminded me of something. I'll give you a fantastic example of risk management. I think they're going to regret it, but the developers did a colossal risk management when they said that the surf park just it wasn't going to make money. So they took a surf park they didn't think was going to make money, and they loaded it up with $207 million worth of mortgage debt. And it's not that big a surf park. Any of it. That's risk management is saying, I don't want this. And they gave it away in a very complex, and I don't like the way it was done, but anyway, it was done.
Plus, there's a certain stream of revenues that come from the surf park that go directly to Wave Venture outside of the 503C as part of the arrangement.
It is part of the arrangement. What Venture Waves LLC did was they had the rights to the surf park. They gave the rights to the surf park to a North Carolina 501c3. Then they went with the 501c3 to the Virginia Small Business Financing Authority, who gave them authority to issue up to $75 million worth of bonds. Municipal bonds, tax-exempt municipal bonds, because it was a 501c3. And then they hired Venture Waves to manage and operate it. Okay, that is risk management. I have a certain admiration for the chutzpah that it took to do that, but I don't admire some of the rest
And
of it.
got the city to cooperate and endorse it.
Yeah, cooperate and pass a resolution of the Virginia Beach Development Authority that said this was absolutely a great service to the city of Virginia Beach.
And I think the CDA did something as well, did it not? They had to do a letter for the bond, I know that.
Yeah, I don't know, but in any event, it was I found it unsavory. I don't know, but it's apparently legal. Just I wouldn't have done it. I think they'll regret it because I think now the surf park is a standalone. It's its own business to sink or swim. It owes more money than it is likely to be able to pay back, and then the whole bond issue collapses if it goes into default. Yada yada.
And the key is the city's land, which has actually been transferred to the Development Authority, has been subordinated to the facility with the debt. So if it does go bankrupt, the bondholders actually can seize title to the property because they've subordinated their title in the lease of the property. To get the bonds, they had to subordinate the property interest.
Yeah,
Which means the city really gets holding the bag if they default.
right. Then now we're going to get to the ones that were actually listed in the bond issue, and this is the only place you were ever going to find any risk listed, but they had to because it was a revenue bond, and that's the rules. Okay, they listed payment of debt service, which we've been talking about.
Yeah.
They thought enough the risk. Well, of course it was risky. The financing authority approved 12% coupons on a tax-exempt bond. That's the highest. I'd never heard of that, and I have something today that I'll share. The executive director of that financing authority sent a note to the developers and said, "I've been in this business 30 years. I've never seen anything remotely like what you're asking us to do." But anyway, it worked. They did it. So payment of debt service was one. Lack of operating history. The developer of Atlantic Park has never managed a surf facility, but will manage this one. That is a true statement. He hired an operator, not a manager, who has experience in surf parks, but the management of that facility is a unique experience set that they don't have. Combination or layering of multiple risks. Yes. In other words, if you add up all these 21 risks, that is the whole is bigger than the sum of the parts.
Yeah, that gets back to like if you have a whole bunch of machine equipment and all of it's 99% reliable individually, the overall system is much less reliable than 99%. It's probably more close to 70.
Right. Then they list risk associated with the multi-component development operational plan and multiple funding sources. That is also true. Failure of any component to realize expected results, whether in timing or degree of traffic usage, rent up, or overall economic and financial success, may adversely affect the operational results of the others. The lead dog in that is the surf park, which is the riskiest of the parks. Competition. Well, there's going to be no competition for the surf park if it's open, but the rest of it is standard retail, office, apartment. It all depends. It's all gathered around the surf park. Is the reason that they're planning on charging premiums for the.
And they plan principally, I think you told us last time, that all the users, they're not counting on tourist use of the facility. It's all going to be used by people within Tidewater will be the users.
Of the surf park. Yeah,
Yes,
the surfers, in the estimate of 80,000 hours a year, I don't want to quote a figure because I don't remember what it was, but they made a big point in the bond memorandum of saying that expected usage was primarily from people in the 757. Economic conditions. A recession, well, first off, backing up, Virginia Beach resort area revenues are down as kind of a bounce back from what it's a fun term, the industry called revenge travel.
Yeah.
After COVID, people said, "Gosh darn it, we're going someplace." So it's down. The only places that aren't down this summer in the resort area are the highest end hotels. The Cavalier, his two new ones down at the beachfront, the Marriott and the
Embassy Suites.
Embassy Suites, the Hilton that
Indian he sold.
Right. So, but the other ones are down, and they're down enough that it's a concern. But a recession knocks all bets are off relative to revenue generation. Insurable liabilities and the cost of insurance. That goes to security. And it goes to whether or not what can be insured. There's a lot of things that you can't insure. Nobody will write it. But the insurable liabilities and the cost of that will depend on the insurer's understanding of the risk they're underwriting. So that's a real issue.
And insurance of the city-owned facilities, the parking garage and the music hall, the city is self-insured. The apartments are on top of that, so they're not likely to flood. But the wave pool and other things, they are certainly susceptible to flooding.
Yeah, I don't think I used to know a lot about floodplains and that sort of stuff, and because Virginia Beach floods from behind the ocean front now.
Except in a hurricane when I was here in 1961 and that storm surge came in, it was from the ocean.
Well, but that's why they built the concrete boardwalk and
That's
the
not big enough for that.
100-yard sand. Anyway, our defenses against flooding should keep that from being a flood risk. Pandemic risk. Another pandemic, dead in the water. Risks from nature, hurricanes, flooding, sea level risk, lightning strikes. I put the lightning map in there. What happens in a surf park or a swimming pool, a big commercial swimming pool? And people mostly don't know it, but if there's a lightning within 10 miles, you got to shut it down. And the way that's handled in other surf parks, and I'm sure it will be here, because you reserve an hour. You reserve from 3 to 4 or 4 to 5 or whatever you're reserving. If there's a lightning evacuation during your time, and it's enough of a time they can't slide the schedule, yours is canceled. They'll give you a coupon. Now that's how it's handled in every other one around the world that I know about. In other words, it's once you buy the ticket, it's sold and you have to come back.
Check valve on your cash.
So I don't know that that's the way they're going to do it here, but I would be shocked, given all the lightning events we have in the summertime, that that's not the way they do it. But don't quote me as saying they're going to do it that way. Environmental regulation. We're about to vote on whether what team we're going to hire to write environmental regulations, and electricity, natural gas, water use, trash generation, all those things are subject to federal and state and regulations. Enforcement of remedies. Each of the bond issues has its own remedies, and they are independent. If the bondholders of the state bonds that were issued for the surf park want their money back, so do the people that bought the city bonds. They all want their money back, and there's plenty of room for them to get it back if with various remedies that are written into the bond contracts. Dependence on third parties and bankruptcy. That's an interesting one. P3 Foundation in North Carolina is a 501c3 that is dependent upon the tolerance of the Internal Revenue Service to retain their position as a 501c3. If they are found to be in violation of IRS regulations and lose their certification, that entire bond issue falls apart, because it's a tax-exempt bond issue that depends upon the tax-exempt status of P3 Foundation. If you read my articles, you'll see that there are some issues with P3 Foundation. But you need to know that when that bond issue falls apart, the whole thing's in default, and there are some serious remedies that include taking ownership, but it'll go to bankruptcy court first, I believe. And I don't know how that's handled. I can't imagine it'll be a smooth process for the surf park itself.
The only example I know is one I mentioned last time we met, is when the Development Authority was going to go into bankruptcy on the 31st Street property that they couldn't pay for. That's where they were headed. And the city stepped in and paid the debt owed to avoid that exact thing happening. This is would be a huge pumpkin of debt for the city to digest itself, and probably that wouldn't be a viable option, I would suspect.
The other sole source problem is that Wavegarden, the Spanish company that is the provider of the equipment, if it were to go bankrupt, then their supply chain would be interrupted at the surf park. And I'm not saying it's going to. I think they're probably doing fine, but who knows? I mean, there's a limited market for
the only contingency for that, and I know that we did this in the Navy, is that you buy a lot of spares up front, and then you have to pay the cost of having them stored so that they stay in shape and all that
Yeah,
stuff. And that's an expense which most private companies cannot bear.
no, anyway, those are the two linchpins, P3 Foundation and Wave Garden. If either one of them falls, then the surf park itself is in great trouble. The next one that they listed was cyber attack. That's usually a ransom. You know, they want to
Ask
get
the
paid
city
to
of
stop
Baltimore.
it. Okay. Actual results may differ from projections of economic activity. This is kind of a really big deal. You know, they could figure out cost to build, but whether they're going to get their money back is all based on projections that I found a little rosy, but that's okay. I mean, the developer wouldn't, at least he thinks on the stuff he owns that he's going to make his money back. I agree, because the city picked up most of the cost. But inability to control increases in operating costs without being able to obtain corresponding increases in revenues. The surf park in particular is stuck. They're already going to have very high hourly rates. And when I say stuck, they're stuck for revenue optimization, because their estimates include a 77% utilization of the surf park 12 months a year, meaning every hour they're open 12 months a year, 11 and a half months a year. The park is on average 77% wave utilization. That doesn't give you a lot of room to increase utilization. In other words, if you're going to lower the price to increase utilization, you run up against a capacity cap.
Well, you run into required maintenance time, and that's going to be a limit. And
Yeah,
those
their
things can't
required
run.
maintenance time that they're planning for is 2 weeks in January, because they're going to shut it, they're going to drain it, they're going to, I guess, do whatever else they need to do whatever maintenance they need to do, then refill it and open again. That's on their calendar. The rest of it, the other 50 weeks, are supposed to be open for business.
I wish them luck.
Yeah. Then I love the next one, risk of audit by the Internal Revenue Service. We've talked about that.
Yes.
Then they actually list the tax-exempt status of the borrower P3 Foundation.
Well, at least they're honest.
Yeah.
I mean, that should be, maybe that's why it's carrying it's junk bonds to start with, but it's a high interest rate they sold for. The yield is high, very high.
When the Bloomberg bond analysts got a hold of this package, because it was a package, the surf park bonds and the CDA bonds went to market on the same day.
That's correct.
And so they treated them, the bond community treated them as a package. And the bond analysts for Bloomberg called it a speculative bet, Atlantic Park. We never heard that in city council meetings. But they said, look, they even used a example of one of the failures that they pointed to was a surf park in Texas.
That's correct. That's been mentioned several times in the paper.
And so it's out there. All right, that is the risk. And again, if the developers owned everything in Atlantic Park, I have full confidence that they would either have managed risk, or their bankers would have called their loans and found somebody to buy it out of bankruptcy. City doesn't get to go bankrupt. They kind of pretend they do on these bonds that they issue, but that's not going to happen. Meaning that they can walk away if there's not enough revenue.
You can just go into receivership like Petersburg.
Right. I'm sorry, $332 million worth of bonds that are city bonds 323, whatever it is, over $300 million. Call it $300 million for rounding. Again, a city can, meaning it is possible to do so, but they won't walk away from that if the revenues don't pay it, because it'll so hammer the city's bond rating for the other bonds that we have outstanding that it would cost us more in the long run to walk away from it than it would just to pay the difference. That's the truth of it.
And that's what happened with 31st Street, even when it wasn't $6 or $8 million. We weren't willing to take that risk. So what people need to understand, these public-private partnerships, despite all those disclosures on the face of the bonds, ultimately Virginia Beach taxpayers and the bond market knows it as well, the borrowers of the bonds know it as well, that the city will step up in the event. So they're getting junkyard yield for guaranteed GOB insurance.
Well, interesting. The 2024 bond issue by the city, this year's bond issue for Atlantic Park, or mostly for Atlantic Park, was rated only one notch below the city's AAA bond rating, because the investors and everybody else said, look, you can take this to the bank, Virginia. They said what I did. The investor said what I said. These guys can't walk away from that. We'd hammer them so bad they'd have to put the city in receivership.
I think it was AA plus. I think was the rating. I think
AA plus. They called it. It's one notch below our AAA because, and they said it in their evaluation. Now, see, this one they sent to the bond rating agencies. The CDA bonds and the Surf Park bonds were issued unrated, because if they'd have got the bond rating agencies would have gotten their hands on it, it would nobody would have bought them. So, but these were issued with, I think Fitch was the primary rating, but they all took a look at it, and they rated it AA plus because there wasn't a snowball's chance in heck that the city was going to let those bonds go unpaid.
What will be interesting going forward is the thing once it opens, and if some of those other risk performance to match expectations, and the city then goes out and issues GOB future debt after that, how the rating agencies take into account what is a liability ultimate risk of that bonds on the CDA will enter into their calculation, I do believe.
Yeah, the bond agencies look at all of city's finances, which, by the way, if you want to find the city finances, look in their latest bond issue, because they report everything in there. Stuff I didn't know. And but the bond agencies give Virginia Beach X amount of room to borrow money before the ratings go down. Okay, and we're well within that. Something I didn't know, we have $198 million surplus on our general fund?
We have what we call as a reserve. We have a bigger surplus than that at the end of every year. They decide what percentage of the operating budget it's between 8 and 12% that we hold off. It's called unobligated reserves. And that means in the event that something terrible happened, we could pay, because our debt service is $170 million a year currently. So it usually has some margin, but it means we could pay 1 year's worth of debt service even if we had some catastrophic event. And that's what caused our bonds, even when we were AA back in the 80s and 70s, often our debt sold as AAA in terms of interest rate, because we had that 1 year's worth of principal and interest payments in cash and unobligated to anything else. So but we got a policy that says between 8 and 12% of the operating budget is, and that gets close to the debt service. Matter of fact, it's a little bit over what our current debt service is on an annual, but outside of the enterprise funds.
Moving from what I went through, the details of it, back to the general overview, I find it to be a failure of transparency of our government, our Virginia Beach government, not to, when they take these surveys of public opinion, but that nobody talks to any of us about the risks. when they're on the when the mayor makes a statement or they're not about risk. We never get to hear about risk. Now, I read 1,700 pages worth of bond documents, okay, to find this information. I'm a citizen. I'm not going to do it again, and nobody, none of you are going to do it. We depend on our council members to do it. We're adults. Talk to us about the potential reward and the risks, and then ask us what we want to do, and that would be fair. The way it's done isn't fair. It isn't right. Um, you don't get to be cheerleaders as city council people for a commercial construction event. Our job, we didn't hire you to be cheerleaders. We ask you to take our place in a representative government and sit there and try to figure out risk reward and involve us. The people of Virginia Beach aren't stupid. Okay, they are not stupid. But the cheerleading and the things like the two council members going to the city manager and forcing him to increase the developer's return on cost. What's that about? I mean, and the city manager told him, look, we've been through this. This is plenty of return. But being the city council has to prove it, they got him to change it. I don't find that okay. Not okay. It's not okay. Let's see. Questions?
Yeah, anything from this audience? Because I'd be having a lot of questions.
Capt Sherlock, on one of the charts that you provided, Langley Park funding overview, equity and bond view, the very bottom net shows 331,464,152 as total cost.
Correct.
Okay, now
That's what citizens of Virginia Beach will have paid when we're done paying for Atlantic Park.
right, and this whole thing started out at 60 or 90 million.
95 million
95.
after the agreement was signed in 2019.
That was principally just for infrastructure. That didn't deal with performance payments and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the performance payments went away in order to fund the CDA bonds. That's where the $5 million limit came from on the CDA bonds. Interest was because the developer agreed to forfeit his performance bonus in 2023 in order to get the money from that bond issue to proceed with his development. But I shouldn't have had to go through 1,000 pages of bond prospectus to find out how much the city, we taxpayers, owed our total cost of ownership of Atlantic Park.
And you might want to share, because I saw your answer on Facebook about the finance department has the real cost. Economic development says a much lower number, and it's a gross misrepresentation.
It is a gross misrepresentation.
And a purposeful, I believe.
It is. You can be telling the truth and misleading people at the same time. It is a true statement that in the year of our Lord 2024, the council has appropriated $153 million for Atlantic Park. That's a true statement. But we borrowed the money, okay? We borrowed the money. So we have equity. There was some cash spent.
Right.
We have the principal on the bonds, and we have the interest on the bonds. The total cost to the citizens of Virginia Beach, all said and done, will be well over $300 million.
And that's what will show up in the CAFR when the city does its consolidated financial statement.
It makes me angry that the city sticks with that number. They know better. I will tell you that one interesting thing is the finance department and the Department of Economic Development work for two different deputy city managers.
Yep, I do know that.
And but the the one with the drawing pen who can draw these slides is the Department of Economic Development. The Economic Development. Nobody asks because I guess they don't want the answer. They don't ask the finance department what the cost is. But that's I'm sorry, that's not right. It is shading the truth by half. Okay, the city figure is $153 million. The actual figure is $323 million. So that's not a small amount.
And that's why that project will probably, I can't foresee way in the future when that project and the revenues it generates will ever bleed out of that square and provide money to the unrestricted general fund.
I think with any of these contingencies of risk, the money will go the other way.
That's what. Yep.
Because we're going to pay the principal and interest on those bonds. We are.
Yep.
So their costs are fixed. We don't get out of the $323 million. That's spoken for.
Excuse me, did you say 323 or 331?
Whatever it is, 331. Okay. Yeah, I don't have it in front of me.
And that doesn't include the city recovering if it did, because it's the depreciation expense in terms of a capital sinking fund for the maintenance of the garages and the music hall.
Right. And in that $331 million does not include the $40 million worth of land that's being leased at $1 a year. It doesn't include the $12 million worth of parking places that are being leased at $1 a year, plus a contribution to the maintenance fund. In other words, I tried to be conservative on my numbers. I didn't want to mix them up, but that's another $52 million that's not accounted for, even in the 331. Okay, so you get to where you're edging on to $400 million if you all in, and for a project that in 2020 was estimated the whole project to cost $350 million.
That's with phase 1 and phase 2.
Yeah. It's at best malpractice on the part of the City Council, the Virginia Beach Development Authority, and the Department of Economic Development. The Virginia Beach Development Authority is staffed by the Department of Economic Development. And we're waiting our 4th Director of Economic Development in the 7-year history of Atlantic Park. That'll tell you something about maybe that's not where you want to be. Any event, one of my recommendations to the city was, look, use your investigatory powers under the city charter and hire somebody, give them, a special master or whatever you want to go in there and find out what the heck's going on.
What Jim's referring to, under the city charter, the council can establish a members of council. They can have someone assist them, and they can actually require people that go through a judge, but they can even get subpoenaed to testify under oath on these types of things. And you're right, it does merit. It's not the only project that merits it.
No, but this
certainly
is way over the
top. But I'm sure the very people would expose would be themselves. So we probably can hold our breath before that happens.
There might be some federal agencies want to ask those questions.
Well, I hope SEC might and IRS might, but I don't know that. I wouldn't hold my breath waiting for the council to investigate itself.
Well,
the
FBI might.
Well, there you go.
Because there's they try to enforce the 2 federal laws that govern one, public corruption, and the other is fraudulent denial of honest services by government employees.
Jim, let me jump back real quick, back to this almost $332 million. Coming out of corporate America, and I've helped open up several stores, not many, but several stores, JCPenney company. Before we ever opened up a store, we did all the marketing, we did all the demographics, everything, square footage needs, you name it.
They've done all that.
Yeah. Now, what we also included is how much money we figured it was going to be generated from sales that we're gonna pay for the leases, the rent, the stores, whatever, all of that, all of that. I haven't been able to find, when I went through your report, what the estimated revenue is to pay all of this debt. I can't find it anywhere.
Well, because it's not there.
And then,
Okay.
Because
here-
the private stuff is not foyable. That belongs to the corporation.
Right.
But they've done a lot of work, but
They've
that's on
done
the
look,
private side.
I wrote in one of my columns, I said, I am absolutely sure that the developer did, and each member of the developer team did business plans
Yep.
on their portion of what they were, here's my gazautkas and here's my gazengas, and my gazengas are going to be bigger than my gazautkas. They do business plans. That's why they all go to get MBAs. It's important. Matter of fact, it's critical. And the city never did one.
That's correct.
And so they don't have any idea what the revenue is going to be. But I tell you, they could make a big improvement in their processes. First, by putting the finance department and the Department of Economic Development under the same deputy city manager, and then making sure that anytime they're talking debt, that it is the input from the finance department, not the Department of Economic Development, on what the city's costs are going to be. They're great. I read all that stuff from the finance department. It's terrific. Clearly, they're good.
We have a question from the.
Yes. I have a question, Mrs. Martha Thrall. Are the same developers, players of 31st Street in on this project too? Which that would be the Bruce Thompson and
No.
in the back end.
No.
The which two council members got the city manager to raise the developer's return?
It's in my articles, and it was the vice mayor and Councilman Urin.
Okay, that's back then. Okay, that would have been Rosemary Wilson then.
No,
Oh,
no.
oh,
Lewis Jones.
Lewis
back then.
Jones,
Okay.
and he's deceased.
Yes.
And so,
We don't want to.
but so the only surviving one of those is John Urin.
Right, and he's no. Okay, now the question: he may not be on the council now, but he would still be culpable for any transgressions.
And he knows it.
Yeah. And Martha Thrall also asked, who is the developer? You make it sound like it's one person.
No, I use that. The developer team has changed over time. Okay, it is led by Venture Realty Group. But they've got some big players on the developer team. They've got the who's the general contractor?
I think, isn't it Jordan?
Yeah,
Jordan.
Yeah.
Great company, great reputation.
And great company, by far the largest commercial property developer in the Mid-Atlantic. They're the builder. Development and construction are two different animals, but the developer actually selected the builder, the construction, and wrote the contracts. They picked well. I don't know how you could do it at something of that scale with anybody around here, but Jordan. I'm sure people would say I don't know what I'm talking about, but they're the biggest. At least.
Outstanding company with a great reputation.
Right, they're a great company.
Okay. Let's see. Just ask our questions. Putting the city at risk. You already covered that. Who is the main problem here? The city manager, city council.
I will never. Well, on the reason the return on cost for the developer, that was the city council, because they had to order the city manager to do it. He wasn't. His figures gave them a lower return. But beyond that, going forward, we're on our third city manager over the 7 years, and the current guy came in 2000, and one of the huge deals, one of the headlines is that the city never enforced the formal agreement they had in 2019.
That is correct.
Okay, not even close. That agreement said that the city would pay basically their $95 million estimate for the concert hall and the
Parking lot.
and the parking, and that the developer would pay $230 million in 2019 dollars, which is $283 million today, and the developer's only spent 116 million. So somehow, and then not in that total is the $41 million that cost to build the surf park. Okay, so let's say in the developer side of the ledger, they had 116 million and 41, so they had 157 million. They too have to pay their interest on their loans. I mean, they've got all those costs and everything, but apples to apples, we're now in an even split, even by the Department of Economic Developers numbers. They're saying the city's spending 153 million. That's 157 million for the developer. That's an even split. Back when in the agreement, the city was going to spend 95 million, and the adjusted to this year would be 117 million, and the developer was going to spend an adjusted 283 million.
Almost 3 to 1, but not quite.
Right.
And now it's reversed.
Arona Marsh said this: the bond issue could fall apart with the P3 fall up. All of this questionable financing has Mayor Bobby Dyer's fingerprints. Then she goes on to say that she's going to be voting for mayoral candidate John Moss. But
he's been there 20 years. He's been on the council or mayor for 20 years.
Correct.
Okay, he and Rosemary Wilson, I think, are the only two people that have been there the whole time. And so the mayor could answer all these questions that people have about what happened and who did what and to whom, and the council versus the city manager and all that. He knows the answers to those questions.
Barbara Henley's the only other member.
Barbara Henley too, yes, but
she's not part of that inner circle.
she's not part of the inner circle, and she does her job of defending the Green Line, which is her job.
Yes, and
very,
does it well.
very well.
now, when you said, I know you asked this, was this tongue-in-cheek when you said that the mayor, Bobby Dyer, is cognizant of all these issues and is thoroughly digested everything in this package, that he could stand up in front of a crowd of people and go through your report, and he'd be able to answer?
He'd be able to say, well, he's wrong, or this is how that happened, and here's what we knew, and here's what we didn't, and all that kind of stuff. I never can say what somebody else knew. It's not possible for me to do that. I'm just saying that he was on council the entire time.
Well, there's been several public forums, mayoral forums, and he's been asked about this. And he never talks about numbers. He said, oh, this is going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But he never talks about any numbers, the return on investment, none of this. When this project will be finished, and when the first taxpayer dollar will come return to us. He never talks about any of that.
May 2025 is supposed to be.
Yeah, May 2025, May of next year is when it's supposed to open.
Yeah.
You ask about when we're going to get our money back. That's what all these risks are about.
Well, if you're asking that, the city manager.
Probably never.
The city manager, in a report, I think it's on page 30 of that report, says it won't be any sooner. He didn't say it was going to happen then, any sooner than 7.5 years. And then he went on to say 7 to 10 years after it opens in May of 2025, which would put you out in 2035 or 2032 timeframe at the earliest. That was to paraphrase, that's what he informed council.
We stop paying on the bonds 20 years from in 2044. Our bond payments are over with.
I understand that, but that statement that he made was months ago, before that was at the $90 million threshold. All this additional debt that's come on board now, it's never part of that formula.
The city council has never, in a public session, ever discussed the true cost of Atlantic Park.
Is that because they've never been told, or they've been told they just don't understand?
You can wonder that. I have no idea. All they had to do is ask the finance department, who put every bit of what I just told you in the bond issue,
Yep.
in 2023 and 2024. They said, well, here it is. You know,
And with you two learned gentlemen, let me ask another question. If this would default and the wave park just goes away, what happens to this gigantic pile of concrete, this gigantic hole in the ground? Will this become sort of like a public pond and put some fish in
you're
there?
asking me to do. I don't know. The first attempt in these things is always to find a new owner at a lower price.
Correct.
Okay, that can make it work because for what he's paying for the surf park out of bankruptcy, he can make money.
And often it's the second party that buys it after the second bankruptcy that really makes money.
It will be, if any of that happens, somebody's going to try to make a go of a Bond Park the second time, unless nobody shows up. I mean, you know, unless instead of 80,000 hours they get 10,000 hours a year, then that nobody's going to buy it. But presuming that it's a reasonable, some investor is going to say, here's if I pay this price, then I can make money on that surf park. And my return on my investment, I can figure it because I've got their real numbers from why they went, from their usage and stuff when they went bankrupt. I know where they fell short. If I pay, you know, they're carrying $207 million worth of bond principal and interest. The surf park is. He said, bond investor should have known better. Not my job to pay them back. It's just, you know, the trustee is trying to sell this thing, and here's my offer.
You only have to look at what's happened with office buildings just to see how low an expensive building can go.
But I don't think it'll turn into a pond. At least the first and second time, somebody will try to make it a surf park unless they can't get the parts from Spain, and then who knows? I don't know what they'll do. But it'll be a colossal embarrassment and will reduce the buzz on Atlantic Park if that surf park fails, which it is set up to do.
And also we don't know if Capstone comes with a set of apartments and retail, which has been that is now another source of competition on demand, might be over the market on apartments, and then the retail could have is a risk that's not here.
Oh yeah, competition's a risk. It's listed.
Yeah, but it didn't mention like how big, how close Capstone is to the wave park.
I did in my.
I know you did, but
Okay.
the buyers of these bonds didn't know. But we now know that's a thing that's hanging out there.
And that, of course, is not part of the bond prospectus, is it?
No, well, you only have to tell them what you know at the time, not what happens after the time.
But going back to where I started tonight, none of this would matter to the citizens of Virginia Beach if we had just provided the land to the developer and he'd have built what he wanted to build. Not our problem, okay? Not our problem financially. Eventually, and then he'd had to sell whatever parts he had to sell. Wouldn't be on the city council's agenda. The big mistake they made was trying to get into the development business, and they're simply not up to it.
That's correct. Right now I have, Chesterfield has a much larger surf park in just 90 minutes north. So,
I think it's like 3 or 4 times. Maybe it's 3 or something. It's something like it's huge.
Yeah, but it's not open.
No.
I studied that.
okay.
They studied it. The contractor they hired to do the assessment of the viability of the surf park back in 2018 or something said, look, I'm going to plug that in. When the contractor who did the analysis, who's a very reputable international firm, said, look, if that opens, it'll pick off some people that are driving down from Ohio to go surfing, but it won't affect big picture since our projections are you aren't going to get that many out-of-town surfers anyway.
I think that's true, just like ours.
All right, so they took that into account, and I've looked at that, and yeah, that'll be the destination surf park. But it won't be the destination surf park for the people in the 757, and they talked
Nope.
about that 3% of our population are surfers, and they did an excellent job.
And
of
that's
the
an
analysis.
overall part of a 1,000-acre development. I mean, that's not like 13 acres. It's a much bigger
It's
development.
a way bigger deal. But they dealt with it. I give the what was it? Their name? Colliers was the international development consultant that did the analysis of the surf park. That's where they came up with, had to compare ours to one in Switzerland to come up with a comparable.
Yep, and they also talked about the one in California, which is in a world class by itself, and it is international in its draw.
Right. Yeah, that's the Kelly Slater.
That is definitely unique.
Right. So but what used to be not very many is soon to be too many surf parks around the world.
Like sportsplexes.
Right. So we'll see. But again, they're counting on people from the 757 doing the surfing.
Okay, let me think what else here. I think that's,
Well, while you're doing that, I just can't say enough, and I hope people that are listening and sharing it with your friends go that link to Bacon's Rebellion, all 11. I think it's just 11, correct? 11 chapter. Take the time to read that through. You probably have to read it a second time, but really, the whole community owes a debt of gratitude to Jim, and also to his wife, who was with us last week, because that is, I know what it takes to do that kind of research. And there might have been a day when we had a newspaper in town that might have had an investigative reporter that they would have invested the resources and multiple talent to do this kind of work. But today, citizens are on their own, and all the talk about government transparency, it's more opaque than it is transparent. And all the data is out there, so you can say that in the sense that if you want to know, you can know, but they don't make it easy to know.
No.
And they don't, and as you said, often I know my own conversations is no one wants to talk about risk, and no one wants to say, well, wait a minute, what if we just had auctioned off that 13 acres and from day one, all the revenues went to the unrestricted general fund? How much better off would we be? And that really is a whole nother question. That's what Dr. Cook is good at, the former dean of president of ODU, is the alternative use of the property that had nothing, and you just sold it and got the property tax and got all the revenue.
I will talk about one more risk that I didn't even write down in the on those. This is a special tax district. Okay, they're Atlantic Park. It's a special tax district. They are already planning on having higher taxes in Atlantic Park than the other parts of the city. And so one of the risks is that people who live there, work there, have their businesses there, and people who visit and have to pay the extra taxes get tired of paying, for example, going to dinner. Going to dinner in Virginia Beach, what is our total meal tax?
11.5%.
11.5%. They're going to add to that for Atlantic Park restaurants. They're going to add to their property tax bills in order to generate the money that the city thinks it's going to get out of this. There are a lot of most of that they're planning on coming from taxes and fees. And so there is going to be a price resistance, I predict, especially in the restaurants, and to some in the retail, because they're going to have to. Those retailers are going to have to pay those taxes. I'm not sure they're going to like it over.
They have to have the pricing power to maintain
Correct.
the people in there. Going to say, "Oh, I'll walk across the street and eat cheaper."
It'll be true.
That will be true.
And the restaurants better be special. The retail better be special. One of the things they're saying is we're not going to have. It's not going to be T-shirts. It's going to be we're going to have upscale retail. They haven't. I track their leasing, but because that also has to be revealed in the bond issues, is percentage of leased and all that sort of thing. But I can't, it's their business. I mean, it should have stayed their business.
That's right.
Why should the city residents be concerned about whether that developer, what rates he gets for his office and retail and restaurant space, and how much he can rent his apartments for? We're not in that business, and the city council shouldn't be.
Well, this has been, I want to thank you for your time. You know, really, you've been most generous. And I hope somewhere along the line, maybe your connections through with, I don't know if there's any kind of awards that people give out. I know that, I'm serious. There's these various, journalistic places for people who do work of this kind of nature. But clearly, I don't know how Bacon's Rebellion is credentialed in that literary newspaper
No, they
world.
don't. They won't give awards to blogs.
Okay, but this definitely, I tell you who should be inviting you to come and speak. If I was at the MBA school at William and Mary and was doing a case study or something.
Oh, this ought to be a case study. I'm going to submit it to the UVA's business school.
Colgate Garden School, but really, this ought to be, that is Bacon's with an S, so it's Bacon's Rebellion, no apostrophe, just all one expression.com, and you can get all 11, I'll call it chapters, episodes, volumes, but this definitely is a classic case. A lot of lessons learned that people could take away from this, and for our public out there, I often said is, we need this thing to be a success, but that doesn't mean we need to reward the people who made the mistake.
Right.
Those are two different things.
I will say it again, I said it before, I haven't found anything that the developer team did wrong. I do not blame them for trying to get the best deal from the city.
I don't either.
I don't either.
American way.
I think they made a mistake with the way they got the surf park financed, but that's a mistake. And if it's a mistake, it's their mistake. But it'll affect the city's investment, and it never should have. It should have never been any of our business what they did with their surf park.
I often said government's supposed to stick to the basic things so that the private sector can take risk, because the government shouldn't be in the business of taking risk at all in the private sector. It's do core services, maintain stable money supply, core services do well. That way they can afford to let the private sector fail, any given company, and the world goes on. When the government gets in here, who suffers? Citizens, because now our tax and everything goes up, but we're not getting services.
And
we're bailing out of
right.
a bad
And
decision.
if a developer comes to any city and says, we can't afford to do this unless you give us $200 million and a bunch of land, you say, well then,
Don't come.
don't come.
Exactly. But if you want something so bad, then they got you.
Right.
That's what I think here. We saw this glossy, shiny thing, and in for a penny, in for a pound, and then we were done. But
John,
once again, just thank you for great work being on our show, and all our citizens owe you a great debt of thanks for the education, and hopefully all the council members are reading this. Hope the Development Authority can read it, and even though they might not like it, they can take away lessons learned, and we can do what you said, adopt this procurement policy of the state act as the city standard. We need to do that.
You never get into this business. The
Right.
state will never get into this business to build a state facility because their procurement law prevents them from doing it.
Yep, we need
Tells
to.
them they have to use sealed bids or very well organized and monitored
Design build, I think it is.
design build, and that's it. This could have been, for example, if the city, even if they wanted to do it, it could have been, they could have competed the design, awarded the design to Hanbury, who is the architect, and then separately competed who wants to build it.
Yep.
I mean, there's a lot of things that could have been done that weren't.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we will return on tomorrow night to our regular scheduled program, and we're going to have council candidate for the 8th District. I think Phil Hines is going to be on our show. We're supposed to be confirming that tonight, but we're expecting him to be here tomorrow night. But again, I can't say thank you enough. This has been an enjoyable discussion. And I would love, and I'm sure they're going to invite you up to Colgate Garden. Maybe you'll be married. And I would love to be in the audience when you go up there and talk about this, because this is a gem of work, and a lot of those students up there will benefit greatly. So with that, we're going to sign off, and good night.
John, as a footnote, I'm going to be sure that Dr. Cook, Jim Cook, gets a copy. That
Oh, yes.
Possibly you could bring them together, the two.
Oh, wouldn't that be great?
Oh, if you
I have
imagine-
time to look at that. Dr. Cook is, I have the
Oh, I
greatest
know.
respect.
Oh, yeah.
He's
He's
just,
great.
he's
Are we off?
outstanding.
He is. Are we off the air?